Today we will be discussing the Egyptian Pantheon and its relationship to the Espers in Dislyte, the mythological family tree, and some lore behind these Egyptian deities. Now before we get into it, let me first mention ancient Egyptian mythology spans more than 3,000 years. During this time period, dynasties changed and the representation of the gods also changed. There was not one unified culture, and depending on the location and time period, these gods meant different things as well as their importance. This is just one representation and by no means the only one. Also, there are thousands of deities in Egyptian mythology, so we will only be discussing the ones associated with Dislyte. But if there is anything that I missed, please let me know in the comments, as well as your predictions or wants for the next god or goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon to come to Dislyte. Let's begin with what would be considered to be the 9 main gods, or the Aeneid, for all of Egypt. First, Ra, the great sun god of Heliopolis, part of Lower Egypt and in the same area as the Pyramid of Giza, Sphinx, and the major city Memphis along the Nile River. He was the king of the gods and the creator who ruled over the land of the living and dead. For centuries, Ra is referred to have many forms, and by the 5th dynasty, he had become one of the most important gods in Egypt. Other forms of Ra included Khepri, the god of the morning sun, represented as the scarab beetle. Atum, represented as the human form of Ra, god of the evening sun, and said to be the creator of the universe as well as the first being to stand on the primordial mounds. Now the most prominent form, Ra, as the god of the day sun. He is also sometimes depicted as Horus or Amun-ra, both of which we'll discuss later in the video. Atum is said to have ascended from the primordial chaos waters, referred to as Nun, and created 2 children, Shu, the god of air or wind, and Tefnet, goddess of moisture or rain. Shu and Tefnet were sent to the chaos waters, but Atum missed them so much that when they returned, he wept joyful tears, and those tears created human beings. There was no place to go for the humans, so since it had not been created yet, Shu and Tefnet then gave birth to Geb, the god of earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Atum was so envious of their affection for one another, he pushed them 2 apart, earth, sky, and declared that she could not give birth during any day during the year, then only a 360-day calendar. One story says it was Thoth, the god of wisdom and knowledge, who gambled 5 days of moonlight, which he turned into 5 extra days of the year. During these 5 days, Nut gave birth to Isis, the goddess of motherhood and magic, Osiris, the god of afterlife, Nephthys, goddess of funerals, and Set, god of storms. These 5 days have been celebrated throughout history as each day representing the birth of a god. Horus is also celebrated during this time, but not considered a child of Nut. Isis was one of the most powerful and beloved goddesses in Egyptian history. Osiris, another one of Egypt's more popular and well-known gods, was lord and judge of the dead, also having the power of resurrection and the renewal of life. In what is probably the most famous story in Egyptian history, it is told that Osiris, the first pharaoh of Egypt, was murdered by his brother Set and usurped the throne. Isis traveled to the afterlife to resurrect him, and although unsuccessful, she was able to get pregnant, and together they had a son, Horus, god of the sky and kingship. After Horus becomes of age, he battles Set for the kingdom in a violent 8-year conflict. It is during this conflict that the Eye of Horus and the restoration representation begins. He eventually wins this battle, restoring kingship and order to the land. Because of this, Horus rose to enormous importance and sometimes equated to Ra himself. Nephthys, a funeral goddess, was known as a friend of the dead because of her care for the souls in the afterlife. In the Lamentations of Isis and Nephthys, she calls the soul of Osiris back from the dead. This text was often recited at funerals, services, and events throughout Egyptian history. Set, the god of deserts and storms, a powerful deity associated with violence and chaos, was also a patron god of the pharaohs, and before the Osiris myth, he helped protect Ra from the chaos serpent Apep during the sun's nightly travels through the underworld. Together they had a son, Anubis. who was sometimes referred to as the son of Osiris because the Osiris myth when Nephthys transformed herself into Isis, seducing Osiris. He was the god of the dead and protector of the graves. Depicted with a black head of a jackal, he helped the mummification process when people died. Anubis would also stand in the Hall of Truths, weighing the heart against Ma'at's feather of truth to judge whether or not the deceased would pass through the underworld into the afterlife. Also in Lower Egypt, a bit further south, was the city of Memphis, and during the Old Kingdom, another set of gods was worshipped here. Ptah was the god of craftsmen and the builder of monuments. Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, plagues, and destruction, often depicted as a woman with a head of a lion, the daughter of Ra, and created from the fire of the sun god when he looked upon the earth. She was sent to Earth to destroy humans for their disobedience to Ra. It is also believed she had a cure for every problem, and to stay on her good side, people would often send offerings and prayer. Together they had a son, Nefertum, the god of beauty. Originally, he was a lotus flower at the creation of the world and an aspect of a tomb, but eventually recognized as the son of creator god Ptah and the goddess Sekhmet, or possibly Bastet, another daughter of Ra and the goddess of cats as well as the moon. She offered protection, pleasure, and good health. It is believed that she as well would aid in the protection of Ra against Apep in the night sky and thought to be the eye of the moon and the eye of Ra. Hathor, the goddess of love, was seen in various forms over time, often depicted with a woman wearing cow horns. She was the daughter of Ra, but sometimes considered the consort to Ra, Horus the Elder, Atum, and the female counterpart of the sun gods. It is also thought that she became Sekhmet after Ra stopped her from destroying humanity, and along with Bastet and Sekhmet, they share the title of the Eye of Ra. A few other gods have been said to be born at the beginning of creation and worshipped. Thoth, the god of knowledge and wisdom, depicted with the head of an ibis bird, is closely associated with Ra and the concept of divine order and justice. He is also known for inventing the calendar, and as a funerary bookkeeper, he recorded the verdicts of the heart-weighing ceremony in Ma'at's feather of truth. Neith was the creator goddess of war and sometimes referred to as the mother of gods, one of the oldest and most enduring deities of all ancient Egypt. She was worshipped since the pre-dynastic period and said to have possibly settled the question whether or not Horus or Set should rule Egypt. Neith was thought to have also invented birth, whose offsprings included Sobek, the god of crocodiles, Serket, the goddess of scorpions, and Apep, the celestial serpent snake. Serket helped guide the souls of the dead to paradise and protected dangerous sections of travel in the afterlife. And along with Isis, Neith, and Nephthys, they watched over the four sons of Horus in guarding the viscera of the dead. Most famously, their statues were found inside the tomb of King Tut. In Upper Egypt, other deities were prominent. At Elephantine, Khnum, the god of Nile's source, believed to have created the Nile River, also known as the Great Potter, said to have created humankind from clay. Setet, a warrior goddess and the goddess of the Nile's flooding, had a child, Anuket, the goddess of the Nile River, also worshipped as a protective deity during childbirth. In later times, she was associated with Nephthys because of Setet's links to Isis and Khnum's links to Osiris. Heket, the goddess of fertility, was represented in the form of a frog related to the annual flooding of the Nile. She was identified with Hathor and originally the female counterpart of Khnum. Over in Thebes, during the New Kingdom, a different triad of deities was worshipped. Amun, the god of sun and air, and often associated with Ra, only later to be merged into one god, Amun-ra. Mut, the great mother, was a protector deity associated with Bastet and Sekhmet, and their son Khonsu, the god of the moon. Amun, along with Amunet, which represents wind and air, or that of which is hidden, was part of 8 primordial deities emerging from Nun that formed the OGDOAD of Hermopolis, which led to the creation of everything. It is also said that Amunet was the sole attendant of the great cosmic egg from which Ra was born. A couple other Espers are represented in Dislyte from the Egyptian pantheon. Medjed, a ghost-like figure mentioned in the Book of the Dead, which translates to smiter, but there are only a few depictions and illustrations of this figure throughout Egyptian history. And then finally we have the Sphinx. referred to as the Great Sphinx of Giza, which was a statue of a creature with a human head and the body of a lion, probably created around the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. Hopefully this helped you better understand the Egyptian mythology and how it relates to the Espers in Dislyte. Let me know in the comments which god or goddesses would you like to see next added to the Egyptian pantheon. Based on what we just covered today, maybe Tefnet, Sobek, Ptah, Khepri, Maat, and Khnum, just to name a few. Anyways, thanks for watching.